West Africa's forest savanna transition zone is in crisis. Farming, population, urbanization place unbearable strain on its forests and spread the savannas. What do they? What is the evidence to support these assertions? What if these forests are created by people and not just nature? The forests of West Africa's transition zone form a delicate ecology, a front line between equatorial rainforests and the arid Sahel. Islands of forest stand defined in savanna. But which came first? Was it once all forest? Or could it have all been savanna? Close to Guinea's borders with Liberia and Sierra Leone is the prefecture of Kissi Dugu, a small part of Guinea which holds lessons for the whole of West Africa. Kissi Dugu has become a second home for two social anthropologists, Leach and James Fairhead, and it's an interest that runs in the family.
In West Africa, there's considerable concern about the deforestation and the loss of major areas of forest. And Kissi Dugu lies flat bang in the middle of where these two zones meet. There is substantial areas of forest to the south and areas of drier open grasslands, savannas, more or less wooded perhaps, to the north.
Kissi Dugu is perhaps particularly striking for the pattern of forest islands in this sea of grassy savanna that is so obvious to any visitor here. The contrast between forest and savanna made it a very interesting place to explore the way the environment was changing.
For 2 years, Leach and Fairhead have been living and working in Kissi Dugu's villages, discussing everyday life, farming techniques and vegetation changes with villagers of all ages. Comparing this wisdom and experience with what scientists have to say. To understand fully the interaction between people and forests, they settled into two villages for in-depth studies. Tolly, near the forest zone, and Zendaya in the savannas.
So did you say that? No, not follow. It's alone. Follow. I'm trying to make a just a unit. If I just a blank, let's say some bulletin of Labugo. I mean, I can just a unit.
To visitors, the forest near Zendaya looks like the obvious relic of a once great forest. But it isn't. This was once open savanna, but was chosen by Zendaya's founders as a site for an early settlement.
Jiri kasi yakono banane kokone. Kofa karsa ya banan fele. Sinduku banaye ferna sinduku ndeba. Wulu boto ka alamso ka shola mini ka la. Aye ferna manifana mama ajilo ala bolo.
Similar testimonies by elders can be heard at almost any village across the region. But scientists and policymakers have overlooked these accounts, listening more to the landscape than to the inhabitants who know it.
Munampa minterela, ansila litalinya ka sola mini soji divi, takana don sola.
We were somewhat astounded, and to be honest, we were a bit incredulous and inclined not to believe our own findings. And really, from that moment on, we felt that if we were really dealing with something that was so contrary to received opinion, we needed to find as much evidence as we possibly could to substantiate it.
In that search for evidence to settle the issue, Leach and Fairhead linked up with local researchers in a project they named COLA.
C'est la seule trace qui existe maintenant comme trace de la savane.
Foremost was historian Dominic Milimuno, who was so impassioned by the study that he now runs his own development research centre. Yet at the beginning, even he wasn't convinced by what he heard.
Même si aujourd'hui c'est tout à fait entouré de forêts.
C'est ça. Maintenant, aujourd'hui, bon, on voit une forêt, mais c'est une forêt qui a été entretenue, d'après ce qu'il a dit, par les pare-feux, par les petits travaux, jusqu'à devenir maintenant une grande forêt. Pour moi, c'était pas vrai. C'était faux ce que le vieux me disait. Bon, j'étais, comme les techniques de recherche demandent à ce qu'on respecte l'opinion de son interlocuteur, j'étais tout intéressé à l'écouter. Mais je n'avais pas la ferme conviction. Pour moi, il était en train de me tromper, de mentir.
Milimuno's uncertainty was hardly surprising when elders would take him to locations surrounded by forest and say the trees hadn't always been there.
Non, tout pour eux. Nani alone kane milachi nyanda wele. Na menda machile ni.
Atina pio koyo mi pombo iwa da. Kongo.
Mama na alone machi kijidu tu.
Anya da kutilantang ngompom. Kijidu tilantang maforo.
Tu bundo anene. Yamde tu
nene wana biele paralo.
Other surprises were even growing on trees. Villagers state that the palms producing their distinctive red oil are spreading north. Yet this totally contradicts expert assertions that the forest is in terminal retreat to the south. Are palms the relics of a retreating forest, as outsiders often assume? Or are they outposts of new forests, landscapes enriched by people?
J'ai eu la chance de rencontrer un vieux, à Sandaya d'abord, et c'était lui pour la première fois qui me disait que les forêts autour des villages ont été entretenues depuis par les anciens. Et que même c'est sa grand-mère maternelle qui était ici, qui a envoyé les graines de palmier vers le sud. C'est pour dire qu'il n'y avait pas de forêt ici, on ne connaissait pas d'île rouge, même de ce côté de la préfecture de Kissi Dugu.
The abundance of red palm oil is clear in the local market. But more visits were needed to assess how trading and cooking patterns had changed, comparing the differences in accounts from village to village.
Mais au fur et à mesure que nous évoluons, nous avons parcouru près de 30 à 40 villages. On a vu que toutes ces idées du vieux, que je croyais bizarres, se transformaient en réalité et étaient entièrement confirmées dans tous ces villages qu'on avait eu à sillonner.
But oral testimony on its own is not enough. Scrutinizing aerial and satellite photographs over a 40-year period, Leach and Fairhead discovered that the forest area has increased. The claims made by villagers were compared with aerial photographs and were indisputably found to be true. Now photographs have just been released from a most recent survey, enabling Leach and Fairhead to update their findings.
I mean, it's actually a staggering comparison. It really does show the birth and growth of Forest Island in 30 years, basically. We're very excited by what we've just seen. We can now have very much more confidence in our findings and our interpretation of them.
It's just the clarity of those photographs, which showed the way in which the forests were developing around the new site and disappearing around the old site, just showing clearly the dynamics of vegetation in Kissi Dugu.
While the dynamics between village and forest may be hard to believe, the effects are easy to see. Bandasiria is a village northeast of Kissi Dugu, and like many, it is surrounded by an island of forests. Yet go back to 1952, and all that is there is a strip of gallery forest running alongside a stream and its source. Since then, villagers have extended this, so that now it completely encircles the village. For Sandaya village, the process is more complex and subtle. In 1952, the earlier village site was in its prime and surrounded by forest, but in 1958 it was abandoned in favour of a site by the roadside. Since then, savanna has re-encroached from the northeast. While the old site was declining, a new village has grown, and so has the forest around it. Now, Sandaya's people are consolidating in a third site, and showing that the growth and well-being of the forest are very closely linked to the people close by. Satellite images also confirm this. Forests are displayed in red, the villages in them are white dots, while savanna areas appear in blue. In heavily populated areas with many villages, there are corresponding clusters of forest islands. While in areas without villages, there are virtually no forest islands in the endless savannas, seen here as an almost unbroken blue. Given the concerns about the pressure population places on natural resources, these findings seriously undermine assumptions that people are always bad for the environment.
Larger populations in a savanna landscape may not necessarily mean more degradation. If you begin with savanna, it takes people to manage and enrich your landscape. Thus, with greater numbers of people, perhaps with greater villages, one is looking at greater numbers of forest islands, greater creation of better forest fallow patches in areas which had earlier been savannas. In a sense, more control over the landscape, more management of the landscape, and hence a richer landscape.
But while tree cover is on the increase, tree size is not. Commercial felling for timber is thinning out the larger trees, opening a debate about forest quality and, more importantly, who defines it.
What is a better or a worse forest depends on what you're going to use it for often, or what you consider to be natural in the first place. But if these forests are managed, created by people for particular purposes, then they're going to reflect the qualities that people want from them.
How clearly researchers interpret such qualities depends greatly upon the methods of investigation they use.
Rather than settle down and ask direct questions about how was the forest in your youth, we would ask women about changes in fuelwood species, in farming, in fishing. Fishing is a central activity for women, an essential social activity. When women get together, they laugh, they joke, they work together. We would ask men about changes in the species they were using to construct farm huts, changes in the pests that they were dealing with, and crop diseases, which all provided indicators of what the vegetation at the time was like. Any one source alone carries its own pitfalls. There are problems of interpretation. And therefore, we've combined the study of archives, of aerial photographs, and of oral accounts from elderly men and women in villages. And seeing that they add up to a common picture, one can have much more confidence that that picture is accurate.
Telma, fanyo kaba doko. Wani fira bwana, mai fira yaran. Baria.
Follow. Fera masiaya.
Kele. Amasiya no kono sisa mpe barke tudi. Lekela abartia.
Working in a day-to-day way has been the principal method which we have used in our research. It's very difficult to understand the local vocabulary unless you see it in action as people are talking about their soils or their types of grasses and the impact that their cultivation is having on that ecology. And you really have to go in there with your hoe to feel the different earth, to feel the way in which the soil changes with 2 or 3 cultivation sequences in order to appreciate what people are getting at, to get into the mindset of farmers as they're interacting with their landscape. It's in those afternoon lunch times or in the evenings after a hard day's work as you're walking back from the field that often people are much freer to talk about what they think about, even though they might be not sure that what they think is perhaps right or whatever. People are more hypothetical. It's through those occasions that one gets a sense of belonging, a sense of being able to talk openly about issues which might be more sensitive if talked about in a head-on way.
If left alone, savanna soils support the growth of many grasses, but few trees. It takes human intervention to create the richer conditions in which young forests take root. Villagers say there are many reasons and ways that they turn savanna into forest. While some concern the settlement of villages, others concern farming.
Sabana sansan adijani mejan kate se wujana ba entre barlay ba bo en jiri dijele no mo tout ça là tout sera sous be be yele woti se janna ka se ku mejan.
The farming technique at the heart of the process is the simple method of mounding. With the bulky vegetation already removed, farmers bury compostable plants under soil that is hoed into mounds. Bruised roots can also propagate bushes and trees, assisting the farmer's aim of thickening the ground cover. Crops are then rotated in sequences that continue the process of enriching the soil. In the first year they grow rice, in the second, fonio or cassava. Groundnuts follow and may be repeated, in a transformation that can be quite quick.
Katuna wule kati yabla blawro wule dula mayala amba boyen sine sankilin sanfila sansaba hasantan lo tremema jiri folo folo me na lawdi sankpan jiri folo amba boyen fe wodi feren o baban ferna bandam fanan de feren jiri to be na la bandam wole sine ça fait du kura o baraka du korodi jida bo daba dala maya ambara fin wodi abarla maya adike sine kumi du korodi. Mankurju bon ande wollan so kono ka telulen wudde ke hiya buyi ande domani sororo ande fanande hiya boro kene ande lemurul lamfana so kono fila ande wa ko kam fana ka jiril la to jiril ka lanka lamini.
Such efforts are in vain if bushfires sweep through, so areas are burnt early, creating barriers for protection from the later infernos.
Senti la bana ande wa manyen utuma tati nyama adofana wadi nyene abanya ne doni obake tudina ça fait tabana adidan wala nyoya matise kado nizil pana wuldina ka bindo mun salta ne kala barka wuldi bindo so la minina fu hawdi ka gwada gwada yi bimba ke yalla adodo bimba ke yalla adodo bake awa jiribedi kumo ka do ngambulu haliba ko be tali mo jere yere ni mamul tabiton ka alate ite tala ka be jiribul.
The intricate knowledge of each plant's characteristics means that every activity can be harnessed to shape vegetation dynamics.
Doye kalali odi doye tigale odi tigao wuli la na bonka kala yere wuyele mamma ko ka tetu kono tigbe me bonka ina wuyele mamma di andan toro amba men ka fata anala andu ka murbata ka lampan ka lampan metre muanyo metre bidabe ande wuto ani suta awa woditi jurukuru tiwo o fana san ken zam vila gara o barke kalai o bardo tuwo.
Even the poles used in fencing will later turn into trees. These oversized cuttings will take root in the soil, eventually sprouting into trees that will provide more shade. While villages may become abandoned, the fences live on. Farmers and forests have become so intricately linked that in each new roof, each new house, and each new village lie the roots of a new forest island. But one can have too much of a good thing. Just 50 kilometers southeast of Sandia, forest now covers entire village territories. To save farmland from complete forest takeover, the fallows must be regularly cleared and burnt. This southern region has lost almost all of its savanna, as forest covers the land between forest islands. The inhabitants of Tolly now experience shortages of the grasses that are suitable for thatching, but no longer do they lack any firewood.
Leyam do kumana achwa sungo manano makwenu adi achi yamdo ninde nin tatawle akopete mera ngwenu kunda yimawa utasin ga mama wa man kepo ngo yamde he penim pongo ho no chediloleng o chediloleng ni kombozi ko yonu du yonguni na le malung agwa pe bunge manano be manda akomu lekundan bidin benda nae janjuru bakira ayondoni kokomana chiko ohondime ajo watanguru ni fa dangba kwenda chwa nasi kalanda tonda ya iwanga lene nda chwa ndani na chwa nda lele nano kesa yondo mungu ne ho bundo ona tiule ba
ya mina solene ya chwambo yeli ni otono lo konjam de benwa taule bande vale obuchi ocho koli bande ke yondo ni saya vane tau yondo na valo hauni ni saya konsi mon tu ochela le faya mde policio mon nanti ngo chwambo yeli ndingo ba policio tinang mankala na hunne ma hunjao olo abaluni tori na tu le no sa atwa chile fo bundo tu dicheni.
With the loss of savanna, women's farming methods have also adapted to the changing conditions. Their work groups perform new tasks, altering groundnut varieties, seed spacing, and weeding to suit the richer forest soils. These are all indicators which show the transformation of savanna from the perspective of women. Such changes affect their work, and so too the men.
Yondo yom dinale. Saya kwasa ngwana none. Yomi wana nunde for politio. Tumaya wacho ambao mi chando fingani ama bara na nundo na tu politio ngwane. Haya bebi ya place aho mi kandu wallo saya wani yom vile. Pandu me hu chinwana. Yolu mo la fura la sungu. Yo sungo wan landu abesi chungvili memele yo besi wow papi. Kale dindo alwepe wallo sea. Pangi dindo kumbanjeni junjo achibe alum.
There's even an art and an expertise to the way a field is burned, for if carried out correctly, it can greatly improve the soil.
You don't better pay, Malon Langon. Doing really, no better go back to you, Palaplanum than Malon Mundele. Bandi Wakio, I will lend it to Malin, which in your play, while lend it to Malin, Lumbalum Hornango, I will lend the cure.
But without knowing the history of Tolly's forest growth, this would look like mindless vandalism and could easily be misinterpreted, or worse still, misrepresented. But what looks like permanent devastation will take less than a decade to regrow. Each locality has its own unique vegetation story to tell, some with surprising hidden depths. Fondambadoo village is one of a cluster that were once linked by the large forest they had created for protection, as forests were also once used as fortresses. But as the threat of war retreated, the forest was cut back, so that now only each village's forest island remains.
Mendemba fonda mendengo fulani. Tuvrabe mende muko mafenya na motanda. Fonda fenya bandu to fonda nanje hodi munesu rojiana. Dabe ndapo lojo na wana anwa makobulani. Abena nonte. Bemba honja nane kono fonda ndana nje dinyono. Abwa ngana wana. Ngana wana. Bende.
Rafiko wana bia mpase fenya ake lolo kao.
Aje bunda mente abe bunda mente.
Wasina bara bunda. Kunonda yonkoma ni bande jolo ni kulundong kiwo di mona hale nenche jalia afonda no je honi. Lontono watawni ko bande kemi. Onya ko ngi kanu no tolindo ni chena mo gwete akulema di twala wana ye yompila bale. Kono nya ta hu pilem ni wana o bundo men no yole. Iwe pa jana pilem ndi okuri yo.
But this most populous savanna zone has now reached the limit of the number of people it can support, while still maintaining forest fallow.
Owa rambilo potantanta fura. Bundo bendo kwantale ni tuama wo. Nanya fura akora bundo de killing one. Pulling it. Pota fura lantan owa kiwa pe was your pillow. Below puyo kan tondo. Onya lang bundo mugu akubuwe no aneni kono mulan do gbo wa le pilen.
Archives document well the use of forests as fortresses. In 1893, the captain in charge of the French military campaign wrote,
"All of that part of Kissi Dugu, crossed by the column, is scattered with clumps of forest of a very vigorous vegetation, made impenetrable by a confusion of trees and interlaced creepers."
Even cannons struggled to penetrate the thick and thorny barriers, while larger trees were used to provide lookout positions.
I hear my vow landecho, Manua Demboni. I said, Bundo Kilanua, Yomi Bedebo, Licho Masindon. Bundakun. Yomi that talking the Atobandana, the Mundi one you. Those who have an asina, you was Ojalo Bandara ye, I just banding. Oh, Chanda.
Duchalu bandara aji pandindo. Atumbulanda kelen. Ina ke dosi na nyumda matula anchira kontroli domo. La chendo huno. Chira prampe do bundo. Oche bapule na nunda si na premier wunduje lo mota finide. Mema le pinking. Wana holwa ngwenu wa hiyo pedo. Fungu bido swerachi. Bing kondit. Ho bindi. Kondit. Ho acheni ko ya yum amungu anyano.
But also revealed in the archives are the repeated mistakes of visitors who observe similar landscapes and jump to similar but wrong conclusions. In 1914, a colonial administrator wrote,
"Never, I believe, has a year so dry occurred in Kissi Dugu. From Kissi Dugu to Gekadu, all has been cut. The effects of this dewooding are disastrous. A region so fertile has become a complete desert. Now there rests no more than a little belt of trees around each village, and that is all."
The same mistaken declarations of apparent degradation have been made by every visitor since, including scientific experts.
They've been so convinced that what they were looking at was savannization and degradation that they haven't found it necessary to look at historical sources. Archives have been ignored partly because they've been seen as the provenance of historians, of a different discipline that's somehow not relevant to forestry issues. The aerial photographs from 1952 have similarly been ignored, even though they've been sitting here right under the noses of people working with Kissi Dugu's environment.
The researchers' discovery that villages can create forests has major implications for development aid, especially when so much is driven by environmental concerns. New forests don't always need to come in plastic bags.
What our research shows is that there already exists at village level a whole range of indigenous vegetation management techniques which serve to increase forest cover in savanna. Techniques which are far more appropriate and adapted to local ecology and to the realities of everyday life.
This came as a shock to development projects working in the same region, as Melimuno and the team discovered when they made their findings public.
Toutes les couches intellectuelles, que ce soit les politiciens, administrateurs ou agents de développement, pensent comme nous autres, avant d'entamer la recherche, que le couvert végétal ne fait que se détruire et de façon anarchique. Donc, en voulant exposer ces théories, on est d'abord rejeté. On n'est pas bien reçu. Et on pense qu'on est même en train de décourager les donateurs, les gens qui soutiennent les programmes de reboisement dans la contrée.
But people did begin to pay attention, and attitudes slowly began to change.
Actuellement, je rencontre assez d'agents, des projets, d'Éric, Bassin Versant, tout ça là. Après avoir passé assez de conférences avec les photos aériennes qui nous accompagnaient, bon, actuellement les théories, les versions sont en train de changer. Je rencontre assez d'agents sur le terrain qui essaient de vérifier ce que nous avons fait. Et ils trouvent les mêmes réalités que nous.
L'étude de Colonial a abouti à une certaine résolution que nous avons appris, que les forêts de Kissi Dugu ne sont pas en train de diminuer, mais elles ont augmenté. On peut l'affirmer.
Quand vous allez presque à Kissi Dugu, c'est seulement, pour la plupart des forêts, c'est seulement au niveau des villages en tout. Moi, je dirais que c'est une amélioration plutôt une régression, parce que c'est dû à la présence de l'homme et à son intervention. Parce que quand vous rentrez dans certains villages où les gens habitent, vous verrez que tout autour du village, il y a une forêt. Et la forêt là, a été installée quand l'homme était là. Parce qu'il y a eu ces caféières, il y a eu ces collatiers. Donc c'est à partir de la main de l'homme qu'il y a eu la présence de ces forêts-là autour du village.
While opinions on the ground are moving on, there remains a gap with the higher level policymakers.
Depuis quelques décennies, nous connaissons une savanisation de la zone de Kissi Dugu qui, il y a près d'un siècle, cette zone c'était une zone forestière dense.
Il y a 150 ans, Kissi Dugu était une zone totalement forestière. Et bientôt, nous serons dans le Sahel.
But forestry departments depend on international scientific and policy circles, and it is these that are the source of this misinformation.
One, for example, put out by an Italian research station, suggests that as you drive towards Kissi Dugu from Conakry, the capital, you go through a phase of shock and then horror and then disgust as you come into the prefecture of Kissi Dugu, seeing the fires destroying the original natural vegetation. And the disgust, of course, is at the farmers who are seemingly behind this vandalism, as it's described. And virtually all of the policy documents put out by Western environmental agents use these emotive phrases to describe the deforestation.
The misinterpretation of farming activities has gone on for so long that it is deeply entrenched throughout Guinea's education system.
Depuis le collège, lycée jusqu'à l'université, on nous apprenait toujours que l'environnement était en train de se détruire.
À mes premières années à l'école, on nous avait dit toujours que la forêt était, par exemple, à Kissi Dugu, a été dégradée, suivait une dégradation. Et les causes de la dégradation, on nous disait, c'était les feux de brousse, c'était la coupe abusive, et c'était l'exploitation irrationnelle des forêts. C'est ce qu'on nous disait à l'école.
Why do visiting experts consistently make mistakes that conflict so acutely with what is really going on? Do deeply entrenched cultural differences influence the way outsiders view and judge the environment? Is it time for new definitions of nature that allow people their history?
Most modern environmentalists pit the African environment against the African farm. What the Kissi Dugu results show, and shout loudly, is that farmers can enrich landscapes and over time enrich them considerably in biodiversity issues or in terms of sheer quantity of timber. In a sense, challenging the assumption that farmers only do damage.
There are in fact studies in Ghana, in Côte d'Ivoire, in Nigeria, in parts of Sierra Leone, which throw up in part some of the same findings that we have found here. They haven't been put together in any systematic fashion as yet, and we're beginning to do that now. But there are indications that some of the farming techniques and some of the aspects of vegetation change that have proved important in Kissi Dugu are, in fact, of equal importance elsewhere.
Ce que les gens croient, à partir d'une recherche, toute une théorie universelle, toute une théorie mondiale peut être mise en cause. On ne dit pas les résultats obtenus dans le programme Colonial mettent en cause toutes les théories de la dégradation de l'atmosphère ou de la nature, mais ça prouvait que par endroit, ce n'est pas vraiment une destruction. Et une action sans recherche à l'avance, je crois surtout une action instaurée et innovée dans un milieu local, sans tenir compte du savoir local, comme si on construisait un bâtiment sur un sable. Et avec un petit coup de vent, le bâtiment tombe.